Hello and welcome to the January update with me, Andrew Dawkins, and
myself, Daniel Bajwoluk.
lovely to have you with us. So
Yes, the new year. 2022 was quite turbulent. So how has 2023 begun? Is it the same or has it changed a little?
Well, I think hopefully we're over the worst of it. And January for all our portfolios and the vast majority of our investment funds was a positive month, and a significantly positive month, which is good, because last year I think we only had two real positive months, and the rest of the time it was either flat or very, very poor. So we shall count our blessings for that.
So the hot topic last year was inflation and interest rates, and how they fared in January then this year.
Well, inflation in Europe is still a major issue. In the UK, we've got inflation again above 10%, and we're seeing food increase by the highest margin for many a decade. In France as well, the inflation rate is soaring, and that's despite the huge government involvement from the energy sector, with big subsidies given to customers over there. So inflation is still very much an issue in Europe. In the States, it's starting to slow though, although wage inflation is still fairly good. But to get back to the Fed's target of getting a 2% inflation rate with wage growth at 5% at the moment, it needs to cool considerably. So inflation is still with us here in the West, and I don't think it's going to disappear anytime soon. And as a result of that, central banks are still continuing with this policy of increasing interest rates. And for the UK, once we go into February, it will be 10 rate rises, one after another, which is quite a feat. I can't remember a time when interest rates went up consecutively for such a long time period. They're not really giving it time to work, so we're only seeing the effect of the first 2 or 3 rate increases, and we've got more down the pipeline. So not particularly good. But I think the market rallied by the fact that it was hoping that inflation would perhaps start to ease, come down slightly, and the central banks wouldn't then need to increase rates as aggressively as they have done over the last 10 months or so.
So why don't we cross over the pond to America, and how did America fare in January?
Well, the end of the year was a very good year for most of the American indices. The companies had a real rally, some good results reported from many of the companies that we own shares in, and it was a good period. Inflation, as we said, started to reduce, which increased confidence, and hopefully the Federal Reserve easing down on the rate increases going forward. The economy was growing. The one thing that was a little bit of a worry was that the retail saving rate fell for the 7th month in a row. So in other words, people are seeing a squeeze on their finances and aren't able to save as much. And that's a little bit worrying, because it does mean that the cost of living is, even for the best of people, it's having a bit of an influence in terms of people being able to save. And we don't want that continuing long term. So it may show that there's challenges down the line. But for the US, for the last quarter, and then this month in particular, it's been a good time.
And if we move on to Europe and world equities?
So it's been a good period for Europe. It's been our best performing sector for many of our funds over the period of January. And actually the growth since October has been reasonably good as well. So some good figures produced by many companies in Europe. Europe was particularly badly hit when the Russians decided to invade Ukraine. Initially, because of the threat for the war continuing to spread outside Ukraine, but also then more long-term in terms of how does it source its fuel. And so the doom mongers amongst the media were saying that in Europe we would be having power outages, we'd have to ration power, we'd have blackouts and all the rest of it. Well, actually, that didn't happen. Thankfully, it's been a mild winter, touch wood, and gas supplies are at an all-time high for this time in the year. So one way or the other, Russia's effects on the West haven't been as bad as people first thought in terms of its monopoly over gas in particular to mainland Europe. So that's been very, very good, and that's driven sentiment upwards, which is super. We're starting to see a lot of industrial action, not only here in the UK, but across Europe at, well, really wage rise demands from various key workers, which I suppose when you're seeing inflation going up at 10%, 8%, 9%, you need your wages to increase, and you can't say, well, I'll tell you what, yeah, I can afford to take pay cuts just to help out the government and the economy. It ain't really going to work. So one way or the other, these have got to end, because they do reduce the productivity then, and they cost us all money in the long run. In France, they've got trying to go after their long-term retirement challenge that they have in aging population, and they're trying to move the state pension from 62 to 64, and now we're seeing again protesters demonstrating against what they see as very poor practice by the government. In the UK, though, we accepted this many years ago, and we just seemed to grin and bear it and said, well, we never get any good news, we'll just put up with it. So we already addressed the issue about the rising aging population. Elsewhere in the world, it's been a good period for many economies, and just wanted to mention India. India's had a very good year last year and a very, very good January. Some very good companies we have within our portfolio. Many of you have been in for a review, and I'm just seeing two of the companies that we have within our top 10, which is Mahindra & Mahindra and Tube Investments, both world-class companies. India's benefiting from cheap Russian oil and gas. Not so sure about that one, but also a very large workforce, and a workforce that's quite skilled, especially in terms of IT. So there are companies that are now relocating or moving more of the workforce over to India from other parts of the world. Notably, Apple started to move some of its manufacturing from China into India, and other companies are following suit as well. So the outlook for the Indian economy looks very, very good this time.
So a positive start to 2023, but how do you think the rest of the year will go?
Yeah, well, it's a very good question, Dan. I think I can ask you the same question.
It's going to be great. bounce back year.
I think probably on the premise that things can't get any worse. I think that last year was a shocker. It was the first real negative year we've seen since 2008. So for 14 years, we had really, really good returns, probably too good. And the bubble burst well and truly last year. I think this year is going to be a bit of a rebuilding exercise, and we'll still get a few surprises along the way. I'm not sure inflation will dip that quickly, and it depends what damage these rate increases from the central banks do in terms of how long the economy will take to fully recover. Long term, though, it will be a very, very good period, because we always find, for the decades of doing this job, that whenever we have a big market fall in one year, we always get a big revival. And it looks desperate at the time when you're in the middle of a slump, thinking, well, I'm just wasting my money here. I'm never going to make back the loss that I suffered over the last few months. And then lo and behold, within a few months, a couple of years' time, nobody's talking about it. We've all forgotten about it, and we're all counting our winnings. So I think that's what's going to happen this year. Maybe a little bit rocky still. There's unemployment numbers starting to perhaps pick up around the world somewhere, especially as manufacturers see that this demand is starting to lessen as people start to experience the cost of those stupid bank rate increases that are starting to into people's incomes. But then next year, once we get into 2024, I think that's going to be a really, really good year, because hopefully the worst will be over. So this year, a rebuilding year, and then next year, I would imagine a big tsunami of growth for all of us.
And as we do every month, we look at the portfolio performance over the last month, 1 year, 5 years, and 10 years. And we'll start with the defensive portfolio. Over the last month, 3.2% growth. Over the last year, minus 8.1%. Over the last 5 years, 7.6%. Over the last 10 years, 62.6%. Cautious portfolio, over the last month, 3.2%. Over the last year, minus 6.6%. Over the last 5 years, 15.5%. In the last 10 years, 92.8%. And we move to the balanced portfolio. Over the last month, 3.2%. Over the last year, minus 6.8%. Over the last 5 years, 22.9%. Over the last 10 years, 130% growth. And moving to the capital growth portfolio. Over the last month, 3.2%. Over the last year, minus 5.6%. Over the last 5 years, 31.9%. And over the last 10 years, 155.6%. And finally, the aggressive portfolio. Similar scenario over the last month, up 3.2%. Over the last year, minus 3.8%. Over the last 5 years, up 43.6%. And 10 years, a staggering 187.8%.